today I'm really excited. We're joined by Thomas from Deel, and Deel makes it really easy to hire people outside of your home country. I think we're all familiar with kind of the contractor approach working through a platform like Upwork, but a lot of times we would like a little bit more control. We like that ability to be able to hire globally, but we want a little bit more control. I think one thing that really bothers me working with Upwork is you can't even type in your email address or phone number. You start to get banned from the platform, right? And it could be just something you want to have a short conversation to help that project along. You can't do it. And so I think Deel's created a platform that makes it easy to have that employee type relationship, but still be able to easily hire outside your home country and do it legally. I think that's the important part, right? To be able to have that relationship and have it legal. So a couple housekeeping things real quick before I turn it over to Thomas. We've got a chat over there. Johnny Anderson. Johnny's been to maybe all of these. I know some of these names, but if you've been to multiple of these, hey, say you've been to a few of these. Would love to see who we have. Carrie, I've recognized a few of these names here. So most people are familiar then with the chat. Pretty straightforward. If you're on your cell phone, mobile phone, just swipe to the side and it'll pull up the chat, and then you can chat and then swipe back for seeing the presentation and the video feed. Great, from Paraguay. Great to have you back, Aldo. I've seen you a few times. What other housekeeping? We want to keep these engaging. So Thomas has a presentation prepared for us. We can interrupt him at any time. If we've got something where we want him to go a little bit more detail on something, if he skimmed it over, let's figure out what we want to know. If we need to back up in a slide and cover something, just drop it in the chat. Let me know. I will. I'll bring those up to Thomas so he can focus on the presentation. We may wait a little bit. We'll get to your question like we always have throughout the presentation. So I think we're good. Thomas, great to have you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate the opportunity to share more about hiring international talent. We're super excited to be grouped with such amazing companies that are truly making building SMBs and building your business more successful and easy to do. So really excited to jump into things. I'll start sharing my screen here.
And I'm going to turn off my video so we can stay focused on your presentation. I don't want to distract.
Wonderful, wonderful. And like Jason said, if there's anything I can elaborate more on, or if you'd like me to go into more detail, feel free to throw a question in the chat. I'm happy to share as much as I can. And if I don't know the answer, happy to follow up with you afterwards with one of our experts. All righty. So quick overview of how this presentation is going to go, or this conversation, I can say, is I would love to give an introduction about myself and Deel. Jason did a great job, but we'll just touch on a few other things. And then I would love to talk about common questions we get about hiring internationally. The first ones will be a little bit more generic, and then the last ones will be more tailored towards compliance, which is what Deel really specializes in. And then we can jump into a more formal Q&A. So hi, I'm Thomas. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah. I have a wonderful wife and a golden doodle named Dawn. I am currently the head of partnerships at Deel. Prior to Deel, I was at Brex, where I also did partnerships. If you're not familiar with Brex, they do credit cards for businesses. And then finally, before those two, I started two companies. One went great, one didn't, and that's kind of the name of the game. But I'm also a remote advocate and really excited to share more. Now, a little bit about Deel. We are a global payroll and compliance platform. So we help companies hire cross-border, whether that be a contractor or employee, and we help navigate on your behalf all of the compliance and legal aspects, as well as help with payroll. We were founded in late 2018. We are a Y Combinator company. If you're familiar with Y Combinator, it's a pretty great accelerator, and we've raised since 2018 $200 million plus from great investors like Y Combinator, Andreessen, and Spark. We are at.
You guys are valued at $1.5 billion, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's been quite the ascent. I would say a lot of what we have to attribute this growth to is being in the right place at the right time. You know, COVID kind of was an accelerator for our business. So we did kind of get lucky there. And yeah, we just onboarded our 300th teammate, which is crazy because back in February when I joined, I was employee number 60. So it's really been a crazy experience. Now, I wanted to quickly jump into, I know we've talked a lot about the pandemic, but really to gain context about this move to international hiring and remote work, I want to just, kind of brush over some things. So, in March 2020, companies across the world abruptly shut their offices and instructed employees to start working from home as a result of the pandemic. And at first, many people, including myself, thought this shutdown would be maybe just a couple weeks or a couple months. But we know now that that wasn't the case. So we were forced into what is actually the largest remote work experience and experiment ever documented. There's never been this sort of experiment on this scale. And we had to learn how to navigate boundaries between work and personal life. We had to work from the kitchen table. And for parents, they had to learn how to juggle virtual school while trying to hit work deadlines. People moved to different cities for more favorable living. We saw a lot of that from San Francisco to Miami and Austin. We saw people moving back to their home countries, and people even started living this nomadic life, moving from state to state or country and just exploring the world. I think it's pretty accurate to say that there was a lot of change during this time, and the memes have been epic. This is one of my favorite memes, and I can relate to this a lot. So you have Zoom meetings with audio only and then Zoom meetings with video. Good thing I did get ready this morning. But I think we've also learned, memes aside, I think we've learned a few lessons from this remote experience. Number one, meetings aren't always necessary. Two, working a standard 8-hour shift may not be the best schedule for everyone. 3, sitting at a desk doesn't mean you're being productive. And 4, remote work can work. And so actually 18 months later, millions of people are still working remotely, and companies like Coinbase, Facebook, Twitter, Slack have gone fully remote, while other companies like Salesforce, Amazon, and Adobe have adopted a hybrid approach. Now, I'd like to take the rest of this time, as I mentioned, to talk about common questions people have when hiring internationally.
So real quick, Thomas,
yeah.
And if this is going to be covered later, feel free to say it will be. But I really want to make sure we hit on the why very early on, right? So we've identified kind of what you do. We've identified you're a key player. Why do we want to hire cross-border? And you let me, because I asked, okay, what does that actually mean? I'm based in the U.S. You're based in the U.S. Does that only mean U.S. out? And you said, no, you've got. You can talk about the countries that you work from, but you corrected me and you said it's outside of your home country, and it's not outside of the U.S. It's outside of your home country. So that's the first thing. But why? Why should we consider hiring outside our home country?
I love it. Well, you are right on cue, because that first question is, why should you hire internationally? And this is a big question that people have. And the first I would say is gaining access to the global talent pool. So if you think of it, if you're confined to a physical location and you're only able to hire people that can commute to that physical location, that limits your talent to less than 1% of the world's population. Now, obviously, you can have relocation and all that, but things get even more complicated if you're hiring for a very specialized role. Let's think of like a machine learning engineer. Now, really, you truly have to get lucky when it comes to finding someone to fill that position. So ideally, when you gain access to the global talent pool, it makes it easier for you to hire the best person for the job. The second is it accelerates your recruiting. So with a larger talent pool, you'll be able to hire faster. The US talent market is extremely competitive because we're the center of like technological development. We're creating demand for engineering jobs that doesn't match our supply. I think I saw a stat the other day that was like, there's 3 open full stack engineer roles per engineer. And so that's when it becomes even more important to explore a global market so that you can fill those positions quicker. The third I would say is you get highly motivated employees. So when you give autonomy and flexibility of schedule, it really does motivate employees, especially if you hire the right person. And I'll get into that, the right traits that you should look for. But not having to commute an hour on a Monday morning goes a long way. And if expectations are set correctly, employees won't really spend or focus their time on spending time at their desk, but will focus more on completing objectives and hitting targets and obtaining results. The fourth would be team diversity. So it's obvious that both gender and cultural diversity are important because it brings different mindsets to solve different problems. And teams are actually more empathetic towards customers because they first learn to show empathy towards their other coworkers and their cultures and beliefs and circumstances. And actually, Glassdoor released a number or a stat that a diverse team is a strong selling point for 67% of candidates. So you'll actually get more candidates interested in your business if you have some diversity. Now, the final one is lower cost of hiring. Obviously, hiring an engineer from Latvia is significantly cheaper than hiring someone from San Francisco, but you should also consider the costs of an open position and what that is costing your business. For example, it costs your company $500 per day every day that your engineering spot is open. So if it takes you 60 days to fill that role, you've already spent, a large amount of money, $30,000, I think that is $30,000 in sunk costs trying to hire that individual or find that individual. So again, not only if you hire internationally, not only will you be able to fill those positions quicker, but you'll be able to access that talent at a lower cost. I'll stop there. Any questions there? I'll just keep moving.
That's pretty good. That's a lot of different benefits. But yeah, feel free to add questions, folks. Let's keep this interactive. Yeah, let's keep going, Thomas.
Cool.
I like it.
So I alluded to this. So people are like, hey, what should I look for in a remote worker? Like, what are some characteristics of success? Okay, number one, they default to action. They don't necessarily wait for a task list. They get things done without constant instruction. The second is communication skills. So it's important to have both verbal and written skills. But I would say, if anything, written skills are the most important, given that teams sometimes don't always overlap with time zones. And there needs to be a level of articulation that allows teammates to understand messages or content without always having to seek clarity or guess what needs to be done or what they're trying to say. The third would be time management. Remote teams are like a revolving door. One person is logging off, one is logging on. A successful remote worker understands that it's not, and I alluded to this again, that's not time spent at desk that leads to success. Rather, it's the time that you spend working efficiently and executing. So really, these people know what it takes to get the job done rather than spending 8 hours a day. And then finally is trustworthiness. So this is something hard to identify when you're interviewing and looking at candidates. It's something that's kind of built over time as you work with the individual. And the best way to establish trust as a remote employee or as a remote team is by doing what you say you're going to do. Executing on tasks, communicating if you're struggling with something, or being upfront if you simply can't do something. All of these make for a transparent environment then allows for trust to be built on top. Another common question is like, okay, what are some of the best practices for interviewing remote employees? Now, these are all going to sound like pretty normal. Like you probably already do this, but it's good to have them as a reminder. So number one, practice with employees, especially if you haven't spent a lot of time doing it. If you've spent most of your time doing it in person, to be able to get the feel of doing it online. 2, check tech and mute notifications. I mean, we've all had issues where we've tried to log on to a call last minute and we can't end up getting in for some reason. So it's important to do that. I can't stress how important it is to mute your notifications. Just 2 days ago, I was interviewing a candidate when I received a Slack notification from one of my leaders saying something about a fire. It took away my attention. I started kind of freaking out, and it threw off the rest of the interview, and the vibes were totally off, and I wasn't focused. And it's just not fair for me to not be at the best if we're expecting candidates to be at their best. The third is being flexible on times. Sometimes candidates will be so excited to interview with you that they'll take the next open slot, and it may be 1 a.m. for them. And they're okay doing that because they're excited about the opportunity. But in all reality, you, again, want them to be at your best. So making sure you take a call in a practical hour. So if they're in Europe, you may have to take it at 9 in the morning, or if they're in Asia, you may have to take it at 7:30 at night. So really being flexible on times to make sure that they're at their best. And then finally, understanding nonverbal cues. So because you're not in person, you can't see slight physical cues that might not be captured on camera, but there are other good cues to look for. For example, what are they wearing? What's their office setup? What's their lighting? How's their internet connection? These are the sort of things that will tell you how serious an individual is about the job and the interview. Awesome. Any questions so far?
I love the be flexible on time aspect. I mean, CrowdSpring has a distributed team, and so it's tempting when you're hiring somebody to say, oh, well, they should show up to the interview when it's convenient for me. But in all reality, the benefit of having a distributed team is that they're able to work at an hour. Your team's able to work kind of around the clock and pick up problems and pass them off to each other. And so the reality is they're going to be working. If you have a good culture, if you're a good employer, they're going to be working at a time that's best for them anyway once they get into the role. So there's no reason to force them, to have a 1 a.m. interview where you're potentially going to lose a great candidate because they're just not at their best, and that's not the hour they're going to do most of their work. So I love that. That was good. Aldous has something here in the chat. Do you find that culture will not be an issue?
I'm going to cover that shortly. So
Perfect.
That's another question is about culture. So give me about 2 slides and we'll go over that. Cool. So let's talk about people are like, okay, like what do I pay them? Like, how do I figure out salaries? So the first step to really figuring out, what a salary could be for a given country is you need to have a compensation philosophy. And a compensation philosophy is a company's strategy on how they will compensate employees. For example, do you want to be a market leader and pay more than most competitors and get the best talent? Or do you want to pay towards the bottom where you'll have more access to a more broad labor? Or do you just want to simply match competitors? So you got to come up with a philosophy that will create a framework for consistency and serve as a guide when you're navigating different market conditions and different areas of the world. The second is gathering data. So I recommend, there's no real simple way for this. I recommend just buying a salary survey or finding free public data online. Obviously, you need to consider like geography, industry, company size when you search. But additionally, you can like commission a survey. This is only really cost effective if you're covering lots of markets and industries. But overall, what I would say is like really the best is just like go find a free public data online. And then 3, you need to analyze that data. So once you find that data, you got to age that data. So on average, wages increase worldwide by about 4%. So let's say you find something that's like an engineer in Brazil gets paid $20,000, and this is data from August of 2020, you need to age that data so that you know what the current going rate is. So basically you just take 4% increase on 20,000 and you would find, okay, we need to pay them 20,800. So first you got to make sure that you are accurate and age your data. And then 2, the goal is to find what is the market average, what is the pay range. You got to know the top and the bottom, and then align that with your compensation philosophy. And then finally, you got to take into consideration country-specific requirements. So each country has different costs due to like the requirements they have. For example, some countries it may cost more due to the healthcare and taxes and retirement that you need to pay to. So it may not simply be a certain amount. It could be incremental based off, higher requirements. I will stop there. I think I can assist with hires. Oh, okay. Jennifer says she can assist. Great. Any questions on benchmarking salary data?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that was 4% a year, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, let's keep going.
All righty. Okay. And I promise I'll get to culture. It's in a few slides. I'm trying to think where it will be, but it'll be in a few. So a lot of people ask, okay, like I found my talent, I'm paying them and they're all set on their salary, but like, how do I onboard them successfully so that it can be a successful experience? And the first is making sure they have the right equipment and office setup. So either you need to send them their equipment before they start so they can be ready to go, or you need to advance a payment to them so they have enough money to be able to buy what they need. Because I mean, a lot of these other countries, they don't just have $1,200 sitting around to buy a MacBook, right? You need to be able to sometimes advance that so that they can get what they need. And I think outside of your computer, like having a laptop stand, a monitor, maybe like a chair, a desk, or really anything else they need to succeed, having a good office environment will allow them to be comfortable and help them succeed. The second is assign a buddy or mentor. If you don't assign someone to help, then there's really no commitment for someone to really go out of their way to help. And especially if they don't know, the person that you onboarded, if they don't know they have a go-to person, then often they can feel a little bit ostracized if they're asking a bunch of different people questions and maybe they're not receiving answers because there's no commitment. And so really assigning someone that can be there to answer all questions, whether they be dumb or complicated, and really helping them through those additional times, because it's really drinking like a fire hose when you start a new job, and having a buddy that can be there, it definitely makes the job easier. And along with that, I think instituting a no silly question policy is important. Setting expectations with the new hire that there are no bad or silly questions, that all are valid and can be answered by teammates or their buddy. I think that's also important, because then they can just get those questions out of the way and not feel like they're being being a nuisance to other employees. The fourth would be a company introduction, and this is something that Deel does really well. What happens at Deel is, number one, in Slack, in our general page, we do a big introduction where everyone introduces themselves when they onboard, share what they love, what they're passionate about, share a picture, what they're going to be doing at Deel. And then they do it again via video on our all hands, and they have an opportunity to, again, share like a little bit more about themselves. And that goes a long way, because it allows other people to connect to those individuals based off maybe their passion. So if they love plants, then all of a sudden they're invited to the plant channel on Slack. Or if they love traveling, then people ask them where they've traveled. And it really is a great way to kick off introductions to everyone on the team. The fifth would be training videos. Now, I think this is one of the most important thing is, number one, share training videos that they can watch and re-review and just go through at their own time and their own pace, especially if you're not available all the time and in different time zones. Allowing them to just have those videos at their disposal is super important, as well as like when you go on team calls or you're having one-on-ones, recording those, because things may be said that they are having a hard time remembering just because it's overwhelming, and they can go back and review those videos. So basically what I would say is record everything and send it to them, and allow them to kind of just review them as a resource whenever they can. And then finally,
real quick to interrupt there. I love the Chrome extensions like Vidyard that make this super simple, because you can, if anybody's not familiar, there's a couple like this, but something like Vidyard allows you to record your screen very quickly. So there is no like complicated recording and then downloading and then creating a link. So you can just, you might be about ready to send an email and you're like, oh no, let me use this as a training opportunity for how I would respond. Hit the record button up in the top. You can show your face. You don't have to show your face, share your screen, don't. And just makes it really simple. And then it creates a link and you can share that. And I think the more we can do that, like you said, not only do you give them a chance to re-review this stuff later, but now you're building up a library. So your next hire is that much easier, because now you just have this huge library of content that's really easy to create. I think a lot of people stress out about creating video content, and that's not what you're trying to do here.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love the idea of having like a hub or an internal wiki where people can go and find all the videos they need to learn. And I'm going to actually go to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about tools, but the last thing I'll just go over briefly: resist the urge to micromanage. When you micromanage, it doesn't allow for trust to be built. And if trust isn't built, that's like really honestly the biggest key to building a successful remote team. So just resist the urge, allow them time to be able to really grow and learn and jump into the role. So speaking of training videos and tools and internal wikis, what are like some remote tools to be successful? One is a communication tool. That's most important. You have like Zoom, Google Hangouts, Teams, Google Docs. I mean, these are all very simple. Everyone uses those. Project management. You have Trello, Asana, and Jira. This is to be able to like track progress on certain objectives or projects. So I think it's definitely important to use one of these. I'm pretty sure Trello and Asana are free. So those are great to use. A third that's, I think, nice to have, not a must-have, would be a performance management tool like 15, 5, or 7 Geese. And this is basically just a way for you to set clear expectations on targets and goals and onboarding, have a gauge of how how people are doing mentally, emotionally. And then finally, I think 4 is just as important as 1, but an internal wiki like Confluence or Notion. At Deel, we use Notion, and I cannot tell you how many times it saved me to just go to Notion and type in something, a random question or a random topic or a word, and be able to find everything I need without having to bother a teammate or ask a team for help. And so I think that also helps with the whole remote experience, if there's just a lot of written content and answers within your business. And that's, of course, where you would put those training videos that Jason referred to. I promise I'm going to get to culture. I'm embarrassed now because I thought it was so close. So then teams are like, okay, like you say, trust is so important, but how do you build trust as a remote team? So number 1, over communicate. So without clear direction, teams run in circles, creating frustration. So something that we've been doing recently is using a huddle feature on Slack. Basically, it's a short 2 to 3 minute unplanned call where we can hurry and connect and make sure like we're on the same page. And I think that sort of over communicating is good. 2 is being transparent. Just be transparent with how people should work with you, or how your team works, or how your culture is of your team. One of the things that I appreciated that my boss did, the head of growth, when I joined, is she sent me a 13-point, I don't want to say document, but note that was like what it's like to work with her. And she let me things know like if she has a straight or dull face, that doesn't mean she's not listening. It's just meaning she's trying to process what I'm saying. Or she appreciates when people are speaking candidly to her. And that really helped me navigate working with others. And if others do that for each other, then it really makes it a transparent environment for people to be able to, work collectively together. The third is getting to know each other. So planning activities that aren't work related and allows people to become friends and get to know each other. So we do 2 things at Deel. After all hands every Thursday, we do a team game where everyone hops on. It's always usually random. I know some companies schedule like yoga or wine tasting or cooking. I think those are great as well. Another thing I would suggest that Deel does is we use a in-app Slack tool called Donut. And what Donut does is it connects you to a random person on the team every week, and you have a call and you get to know each other. And it's great because I've met people from entry level to C-level, and I've gotten to learn new aspects of the business and learn new cultures. So I love that.
I got to interrupt you right there, Thomas, because depending on the group that we have, I could see a lot of eye rolling if we're talking about, team yoga and getting together for trips and things like that. So what I want to do is just take a step back. Like if you're a small business, if you just have a couple employees or a handful, and you don't want to, they're distributed, you don't want to do some of these crazy things. It's literally as simple as maybe once a week or once a month, getting together for 30 minutes and not talking about work. Okay, so it's as simple as just getting everybody together, get on a video call, and there's only one rule: don't talk about work. And what you find is you get into conversations around people's hobbies and what they're doing and their interests, and you get to understand the person. And it's a small commitment. If you're talking, some other commitments when you're a $1 billion company like Deel, you can afford to do, the yoga meetups and different groups. If you're a small business, you can definitely afford 1 hour a month where you get to learn the people on your team and don't talk about work. So I think that's an easy way for us to implement what you're saying.
Definitely. I think anytime a team can have a team call and then another team call where they just kind of shoot the shit and just talk and just, do whatever, learn about each other's, travel plans. I think that's great. Thanks for bringing that up, Jason. Last 2 points, I'll go briefly because we have a lot to cover. Stick to clear expectations. Don't move the target too quickly. Often people see that something's not working with a remote or international employee and they move the target. It doesn't allow them to calibrate or get used to working. So if it's not working right away, don't switch things up. Don't move the target. Give the person time. And after a few months, that's when you can, start adjusting, expectations. Finally, we've talked about this a ton, focus on work done, not hours worked. It's pretty clear. That's really what's going to produce, an autonomous environment where people just get work done and deliver. Okay, culture. Whoever asked, here it is. Okay, so I can't remember what the question was. Culture, is that an issue? Okay, well, let's talk about like some of the things that can make it so it's not an issue. Number one, be forgiving with language. Not only is English difficult, but the way things are said aren't always how they mean. For example, some cultures are more direct than others and can come across as aggressive or mean. I found it just to take every comment with a grain of salt, whether it be someone saying they're okay when they're really not okay because their culture is they're not vulnerable, or if some are just very direct and there's no emotion. They're really not being a jerk, that it's just the way that they speak as a culture. So be forgiving with language. I think culture is not a problem when, number two, you learn about cultures. So it's important to empathize with customers, and you can really only do that and build the best customer experience when you have practiced empathy, and that starts with your coworkers. So it's difficult to create empathy without understanding culture. And so like learning about, okay, what do people in Latvia care about? What do our Brazilian colleagues, celebrate? What holidays do they observe? Having some sort of understanding of culture allows you to build empathy towards each other and be a little bit more forgiving. Something we do at Deel is every company-wide meeting, we have 5 minutes that someone comes up and talks about their country and their culture and their holidays. And that allows us to be a little bit more open-minded, which I think makes us a better team. Understanding holidays. So this is something that I've had to learn this month. So we have a lot of Jewish colleagues at Deel. I didn't know that it was the Jewish New Year during September, and they've been gone a lot. And it's okay because these days are important and they're holy. And so understanding what holidays people observe and why they observe them allows you to navigate this worldwide team, and most of the US, we celebrate around the holiday time in December. And so really just understanding what people may be celebrating and why allows you to set clear expectations throughout the year so you don't get frustrated. And then finally, expect the unexpected. We all learned this with COVID, but there's also country-specific questions. Like, for example, there was the Israel and Palestine conflict, and that was stressful, and a lot of our Israel folks, were not working, or for example, there's volatility in governments in Latin America frequently. And so the best thing you can do is just expect the unexpected, because you never really can control some of these country-wide things. I'll stop there. Anyone?
I think that's great. Aldo, if we didn't get as deep or as specific in the cultural aspect that you want, or anybody else, feel free. I think this is a big one, right? I mean, I think we like working with people that are like us, that look like us, that talk like us, right? And so there's nothing wrong with that. But when we're trying to access a global talent pool, when we're trying to be more empathetic, these are things we're trying, right? And so we're not we're not succeeding all the time, and sometimes it's a little bit harder. It doesn't come as natural. So I think your slide here coupled with the slide before on getting to know the person through some type of out of work conversation or game or something like this. I mean, COVID showed us that you can have lots of games based off of Zoom, right, or these other channels, Hangouts, where you can engage, right? You don't have to be together in a physical area. The more we can do this, the more the culture is not as big of an issue. I think that was great. Any more comments, please leave them. Let's ask Johnny Anderson here. Had this a question on contract workers. And I think we could probably handle this in two different parts. So I wanted to bring it up now around culture, because I think part of the response to Johnny is around how does all this work from a cultural perspective when they're not an employee, right? How much time do I want to invest in them? And then I'm sure you'll cover later, how does all of this work more on a deal structure, right? From a legal perspective. So we can answer it twice, but let's talk about contract workers from a cultural perspective. I mean, I don't see any real problem with implementing all of this from a contract perspective. The only difference is really kind of your commitment levels to each other. With a contract worker as an employee, you're not fully committing to a certain amount of work and control over that employee, and the employee is not committing to giving you as much time as a full time. But you still want to know the person. You still want to, you get to know them, get to understand their culture, not be a jerk, right? And I think, I think when I look at this, separating, I've worked with Upwork plenty of times, right? And I've worked on kind of the distributed team where I'm managing employees around the world. You treat them differently. There's a different aspect. With Upwork, it's very transactional. It's like, do this thing because I'm paying you and I need it done. With an employee, it's much more of I want to get to know you. I want you to do your best work. I want to be empathetic. And so I think the more we can take that empathy and understanding and getting to know them as a person, not to the contract side, not only do we get better work, we're just better people. We're treating them better than a transaction. What do you have to say on that?
You nailed it. I mean, really, you would be surprised on the effect that happens to that contractor when you start treating them more humanly, I guess, less transactionally, when you start understanding their culture and understanding them as a person. You nailed it. You're going to get better quality of work, and it's going to be a better experience. And so, I mean, it's hard. Yes, the difference between contractors with culture is it's sometimes a short-term relationship. It's not as a tied down unity, like they're not technically an employee. There's less commitment. You can't have necessarily control over their schedule. And so all of that makes it more difficult to do these things. But either way, we should be doing these things if we want to have a better and more successful experience working with international contractors.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it really just comes down to deciding you're going to spend a little bit of extra time and money with a contract worker that is not going to lead to a result or product, right? I think that's very easy to see with a contract or with an employee. But with a contractor, if you're hiring them for just a small project, devote half an hour, to understanding them and their family. Great. Let's make sure we get to Johnny's question later when we start talking more about the kind of legal aspect and how that works. All right.
Yeah. So now we're diving in. Here it is. Now we're diving into more of like the compliance side of hiring internationally. And this is more specifically to what Deel does. But a lot of people ask, okay, like how do I hire someone compliantly? And really there's three answers to this. Number one, you open up an entity in the country that you're looking to hire. And this is specifically when hiring an employee. Obviously, this is not super easy or fun. You need like a local office, an address registered to a subsidiary, and a local bank account. And along with that, you got to understand regional benefits, payroll taxes, compliance, and HR laws. Kind of a nightmare. This is really only for like your Coca-Colas and your GEs and stuff like that have one person, 10 people to navigate this. Now, the second is an EOR or PEO service. EOR is employer of record, PEO, if you're not familiar. So basically, I'll talk a little bit about the differences here, but a PEO is a company that partners with your business to provide HR services such as payroll, benefits, tax filing, those sorts of things. And this is like known more as co-employment. And you, as the company, actually hold still all the liabilities and responsibilities. Now, employer of record, which is what Deel is, it offers many of the same things. So they help with like timekeeping, payroll, compliance, benefits, unemployment claims, workers' comp, all that stuff. But on top of that, because EOR is actually the legal employer, it's the EOR that hires the employee under their local entity. They also hold all of the liabilities and responsibility for the workers. So really, I guess the main difference is they both help you manage and navigate international laws and regulations and taxes and payroll and all that. The difference, I guess, being EOR holds all the liability because they're the ones that actually hire it under their entity. So that's the second way you can do it for hiring an employee. Or the third is you just simply hire them as an independent contractor. And it's obvious why people do this most often because it's more cost effective, simple. You can do it quicker. You don't have to navigate a lot of the crazy stuff that I just mentioned. Any questions on that? I'll jump into difference between contractors and employees then. And this is pretty simple as well. So there's really three things: relationship, control, and taxes. So hiring a contractor is more flexible. There's no need to pay health insurance or benefits. Termination is more simple. So this is obviously the opposite of employees. So that's kind of the relationship. The second is control. So with independent contractors, you don't have the right to control their schedule and a lot of the conditions. They don't depend on you as the employer. Really, the employer doesn't have the right to instruct how the work is done. Because if we are instructing like how the work is done, then this is a sign of the employee. So really, it's like giving more like tasks and objectives and then them meeting it rather than you telling them A, B, C, D, this is how you do it. And then three, taxes. So contractors are responsible for their own taxes, while employees, the taxes are managed by the employer. So that's pretty obvious. And as you know, W-2 managed by the employer in the US, 1099 is for contractors in the US, managed by the contractor. And then the W-8 Ben is essentially the contractor version, international version for taxes. So you would essentially, if you hire an international contractor, you would issue this document to them. Any questions on differences between contractors and employees? Okay. I'll jump into, so a lot of people then ask, okay, so do I hire talent as a contractor or employee? Well, there's obviously, a few different, things you should weigh. The first being country regulations. So depending on the country, for example, Germany, it's less friendly to hire as a contractor rather than an employee due to a lot of the complexities of the contractor laws. And then countries like the Philippines are super friendly as far as like contractor laws. So depending on the country, that's one of the big decisions when it comes to hiring an employee or hiring a talent as a contractor or an employee. The second would be cost. Contractors are significantly cheaper because you're not having to pay and keep track of all the benefits and healthcare and stuff like that. If you do end up using an EOR or PEO service, they can tend to be expensive just because they're managing so much of that employee and carrying some of the liability. And then culture. So like outside of laws, which might favor employees over contractors, cultures also might favor one or another. Like, for example, Canadians, they're more inclined to be an employee rather than a contractor. So it's better to hire them as such. And that goes for like Philippines and a lot of these European countries where we end up hiring contractors, engineering talent. A lot of them are more favorable culturally to the contractor side. I will stop there. Any questions? In Canada, you can apply for a Canadian business number without an open illegal entity. We could confirm that there would be no additional corporate tax filings. Great, Jennifer. Thank you for the note. Appreciate it. Great context. Cool. Next is international contracts. So people ask, okay, like I need to write a contract. What do I need to write about, or what do I need to worry about? So number one, making sure that a contract is locally compliant. So every country has its own laws and regulations for employment. Using a generic contract opens up the door for legal risks. For example, Russia requires contracts to be written and displayed in both English or Russian. Otherwise, the contract will not be legally recognized. So can you imagine getting in some IP lawsuit with a Russian contractor and you realize that your contract's not even valid? That would not be good. The second is invention rights and IP protection. Obviously, you want to make sure your company is protected by ensuring that your IP assignment and your contract is airtight. And this is something that some countries have different laws. And so language can change based off what needs to be written for you to have an airtight contract for invention rights and IP protection. And then finally, probationary periods. So due to restrictions presented by at-will employment, terminations vary as far as like how you can do them. So it's important that you establish a reasonable probationary period. For example, Germany has a 6 months probationary period, while China is a month. But it's important to build these into contracts, because if something doesn't work out in that first month in China, you want to know that you want to make a decision during that first month, rather than after you pass that month, then it could get way more complex to let that person go. So building in probationary periods just protects you, and it makes it easier to terminate someone if it's not the right situation. And this is mainly for employees. Any questions about international contracts? Okie dokie. So what are the risks of hiring internationally? So the big one, misclassification. So that's basically the illegal practice of categorizing a work like an employee as an independent contractor. Mainly people will hire or will categorize someone as an independent contractor to cut costs, labor costs. Usually you can save about 30% when hiring as an independent contractor over an employee. But violations can be severe. You will probably have to do reparations. There could be financial penalties on top of that. It could damage your reputation, and there could be jail time depending on how intentional it was. So really, you got to be careful on how you treat your contractors. So for example, you can't give them insurance directly, or they could be classified as an employee. Or if you buy their equipment, that could also in some countries classify them as an employee. Or if you give certain paid time off, that could also be. So be careful on what you do when you're working with independent contractors, because it could classify them as an employee, and then you have to back pay all of the benefits and taxes and stuff like that. Briefly, don't want to go too much over this. Here are like basically the fees in the US. So if it's an honest mistake, you can see the fees here. If it's an intentional mistake, obviously the penalty is larger. And if you want to just take a screenshot or whatever, that's fine. The second is labor law violation. So I've mentioned that every country has its own laws and regulations for employment, and that could include notice periods before termination, compliant contracts like the Russian thing that I mentioned, and other rules basically designed to protect employees. And so one of these examples of a labor law violation could be, for example, in Hong Kong, severance needs to be paid if the employee has 2 years of seniority. Meaning if they're an entry level, you don't have to pay severance, but if they are a seniority talent, then you do have to. So it could get as granular as what level of seniority are these people when it comes to, what sort of labor laws do you need to abide by. So it's recommended to avoid these, obviously, labor law violations, because they cannot be nice. And then finally is running payroll incorrectly. So it could be making the wrong calculation when sending a payment or omitting a contribution that you should be paying towards that affects your employees at home or take home pay or benefits. So this not only costs time, but could become extra complicated if, this problem persists for many months and then you realize 10 months down the road that you were paying incorrectly to taxes or to healthcare or retirement accounts. So really making sure you run payroll correctly is important. I'll just go briefly over this because I don't think this is as important, but basically, so we can have time because we're getting close. So, how do you provide health insurance for international workers? If they're a contractor, don't mess with giving it to them directly. Don't give them money and say, use this towards healthcare. Basically, just say, here's a stipend to take care of you and your family. And that's really the best way to do it. If they're an international employee, then I would recommend using a remote or international provider that can kind of give you a one-stop shop for all your international workers, just because it can be a huge administrative burden if you're managing different providers from different countries. And then finally, if you just get an employer of record or PEO, then it's solved for you. So you don't have to worry about providing health insurance. So I've talked a lot of things. I just want to talk briefly about Deel and what we do. I mentioned we're a global payroll and compliance provider. We do a lot of the stuff that I talked about. So we help with full global compliance, all the crazy things I mentioned, like labor laws and contracts and IP we manage. We also do compliant document collection. Some examples, some countries require quarterly for you to collect a document, or every 6 months to collect a working visa. So we do that automatically. We also do one-click payments to your entire global team in 120 currencies. We also keep track of taxes and all that stuff and payouts to retirements. And then finally, we also do automated invoicing. So really the only thing you have to worry about is sending that to your accounting team and you're set. But I don't want to go too much into Deel. If you're interested in learning more, shoot me an email, throw it in the chat right now.
And Deel does both contractors and employee relationships, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So what's great about Deel is we help bring the contractor experience closer to that of an employee. So we help provide lots of cool discounts. Like us as the middleman, we give discounts to health insurance, or we help them with co-working space. And we have cool things like advance pay where they can get their money earlier. They can pull out their money in PayPal or crypto or any sort of currency. So it's really a great way to bring the contractor experience closer to an employee. And then again, yeah, we do manage also the employee side where the employer of record, we hire the employee under our Deel entity in whatever country it is. And then we pass on the working relationship to you as a company, and you own it as it was normal, except for we take care of all the taxes and benefits, and we carry all the liability. So yeah, great question.
And then if do you have some type of a consultation or something where I'm thinking, okay, this might be for me, but I know about what job I need, but I don't know which country I'm interested in hiring from. Do you have a consultation where you sit down and talk through kind of what the goals are?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we can do is we can hop on a call with you. It's free for 30 minutes or an hour, and we can basically walk you through, which countries are friendly to hire contractors in, or should you avoid hiring a contractor here, or should you hire an employee here? We can walk you through all of the costs, holidays, benefits, requirements when hiring anywhere. So yes, we do a consultation. Feel free to reach out to my email there, and we can get you set up. And additionally, we'll make sure to hook you up with some sort of discount for attending the webinar. It says here, Aldo, with all the administrative burden, will be convenient to have foreign contractors. Are you saying, is it more convenient to have foreign contractors than employees, Aldo? Because of the administrative burden? Yes. So in most times, yes, except for if, like, let's say you're hiring a senior talent, they're not going to want to be a contractor, right? They're going to want benefits, and they're going to want to be a full-time employee, especially if, like, to be able to get a house, they have to prove that they have full-time employment as an employee, right? So a lot of people prefer to be an employee. And if that case, and you need that talent because you're trying to fill your positions, sometimes there's really no other, solution but to hire them as an employee. And that's where someone like Deel comes into play to really help it. But definitely if it's a short-term commitment, or you really want to hire and move quickly, that's where it's awesome to have a contractor. But yeah, so that was the end of my presentation.